Hey, good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jake Ward in for Gadi, Schwartz. I'm coming to you from San Francisco. There is a lot going on. Let's get right to it. As Republican candidates gather here in California to win over voters, Donald Trump is in Michigan trying to win over blue-collar workers. Time will tell if Trump's speech tonight will move the needle for him, but the United Auto Workers chief has already made his feelings pretty clear.
I see no point in meeting with him because I don't think the man has any bit of care about what our workers stand for, what the working class stands for.
Then, with the writer's strike officially over, the question now becomes, will the actors get what they want?
It is possible. The writers have proved that. We're pretty much asking for the same things, just on the other side of the screen.
Remember that U.S. soldier who ran across the border into North Korea this summer? Well, he is back in U.S. custody tonight.
He is in U.S. officials' hands in China, and then making his way back to the United States.
And believe it or not, Google turns 25 today. We will look back on how the world's most famous search engine has changed our lives. Former President Donald Trump is visiting auto workers in Michigan tonight, a day after the current president, Joe Biden, showed up on a picket line with UAW members, a historic first for a sitting president. Trump, on the other hand, is minutes away from speaking to a group of auto workers at a non-union plant. And Trump is doing this instead of taking part in the second Republican primary debate, which is scheduled to take place in about an hour here in California. So what kind of message does this send? NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is at that Michigan plant with Trump, and he joins us now. Vaughn, great to see you. Vaughn, how are people feeling ahead of the Trump speech? I know the union president obviously had a bit to say, right?
Right. This is for Donald Trump here, about 300 folks that are in the room. And this is a clear contrast to the other Republicans that are on stage at the GOP debate. Donald Trump making the case that he's taking Joe Biden head on. Of course, the current president was here just outside of Detroit, but actually joined UA workers on the picket line in UAW leadership, in contrast to Donald Trump, who is actually here and will be speaking momentarily at a non-union body part manufacturing plant, and not joined by UAW leadership. The president of the UAW speaking with quite disdain for Donald Trump as the potential Republican nominee. I want to let you hear, though, from a couple of the workers who were on the picket line when we asked them about Donald Trump being here. Take a listen.
So if it takes Trump to come and support us as well for the big three to come to the table, so be it. Like, we need as much support as we can.
I would like to hear him, talk about, let's get a deal done, Us union workers like to work. I love what I do.
Jake, that's where this distinction is between being pro-union and pro-worker, is Donald Trump makes the claims that he is. Of course, Donald Trump, if you go back to his 4 years in the administration with the National Labor Relations Board, as well as with his own Department of Labor, in numerous rulings and opinions, gave greater power to companies, employers, and took away some of the bargaining rights of individuals, workers who wanted to create unions in the workplace. So for Donald Trump, in a state that he narrowly lost to Joe Biden in 2020, being able to win over some of these UAW workers is key to his electoral success if he, in fact, becomes the Republican nominee in 2024.
Well, the folks you spoke to there, Vaughn, obviously, feel most concerned about getting a new and better contract. At this point, their union is elbows deep in presidential politics. Do you get the sense that it bothers them that so much attention is being paid to the former president and President Biden as opposed to their fight for a new contract?
Right. A couple of the folks told us that they didn't care that either Biden or Trump were here, that they were both looking to just score political points, and that ultimately agreement will come on the negotiating table between the UAW leadership and the big three automakers. But, a couple of the folks that we talked to said the fact that Joe Biden is the first current sitting president to actually join folks on the picket line means that attention is rightfully being paid to what they say is inequality that has only grown over the years between the executives at auto companies and, frankly, corporations across the country and the workers that are actually doing the work here. As for, Donald Trump, I was talking to one of the striking workers who is here. I said, what does it mean to you, though, that, he's coming and speaking at a non-union plant? And he said, of course, that he'd prefer to be speaking at a UAW facility. But at the same time, for a Republican to be addressing union workers is a step forward. Of course, the Republican Party, dating back to Ronald Reagan, when he laid off and fired more than 11,000 air traffic controllers who went on strike. This is notable. Of course, the 7 other GOP candidates are taking the stage at the Ronald Reagan Library tonight here. And so for Donald Trump, he is clearly trying to lay claim to being the pro-worker, more populist Republican presidential candidate, which ultimately gave him his first White House victory back in 2016 when he beat Hillary Clinton by just over 11,000 votes here in Michigan. Jake.
And Vaughn, briefly before I let you go, it looks, of course, like more plants might be joining the strike. Is that right? And if enough auto workers join, what do you think that could mean for the industry in the short term?
Exactly. To give folks an idea, we're talking about 12% of UAW workers are currently on strike. So as compared to the entire UAW population, it's still a rather small part, but we're talking about 18,000 workers. And Ford was spared of losing any of its workforce, but a source now tells NBC that by 10 a.m. Eastern time this Friday, if a deal is not struck, if there's not a certain progress made at the negotiating table, that the UAW is set to have a greater part of its workforce that would impact all 3 of the big automakers go on strike. So we don't know exactly what that number is, but in the next 2 days, it should be really clear where the UAW feels they are in negotiating with the executives of the big 3.
Vaughn Hilliard keeping his eye on a lot of things for us. Vaughn, thank you so much. Now, in what's becoming an increasingly familiar, split-screen experience, while former President Donald Trump is speaking in Michigan tonight, well, the majority of the Republican presidential candidates are getting ready for the second presidential debate here in California. And that means, of course, that Trump will not be among them. Now, here are the 7 candidates who will be there. As to why Donald Trump is missing out on a second debate this year, well, Trump says it's because his voters already know who's going to win. And according to the polls, it could be that he is right. The latest NBC News poll shows Trump with a more than 40-point lead, 40 points over his closest competitor, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has criticized Trump for not being on the debate stage tonight. So let's bring in NBC's Dasha Burns, who's in Ronald Reagan's beloved Simi Valley, California for us. Dasha, we just saw those poll numbers showing Trump's lead. I mean, this is the second time Trump is missing the debate. I mean, explain this to me. Is anyone even going to be watching this? I mean, do voters want to hear from the likes of DeSantis and Haley and the rest of them?
It's a great question, Jake, and I think people will be watching, and here's why. First of all, the last debate did have really strong viewership numbers, but the other factor here is who is watching and who do these candidates really want to watch, and that is a very select kind of voter in a very select place. I'm talking about Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and the voters in those states, they are paying a lot of attention because they know how important their role is in sort of narrowing down the field in those early primary states. And so they really are paying attention from everything we've been hearing in the field. So, you may debate whether or not general election debates, how much impact they have with a general election voter base. But when it comes to these primary debates, they really can move the needle because you have fewer voters and fewer places that you need to convince. And they are paying more attention, Jake.
Dasha, you watch this stuff so closely and so well. So let me ask you, right? Debates are all about preparation. And I can imagine these various candidates, prepping for what they would imagine would be some of the toughest questions to come at them tonight. And I'm wondering what you think those might be, right? Will it be something, about Trump's absence? Will they be hard-pressed to try to explain that? Will it be, Senator Robert Menendez's indictment and how they could explain that, but then their different treatment of the former president? I mean, what do you think they are rehearsing for tonight that could be a challenge for them?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. Second, look, I think that Trump's absence, of course, looms large over all of this. You've had Florida Governor Ron DeSantis particularly take aim at Trump for not being here. I talked to his deputy campaign manager earlier today, did an interview on Meet the Press Now with him where he also took a dig at Trump for his absence. But I think overall the candidates are eager to focus on the issues. And an interesting thing that I've been hearing from voters, they're actually folks I've been talking to are somewhat glad that Trump is not on the debate stage, at least for these first two debates, because they feel like they are able to hear more from these other candidates. They feel like they know what Trump has to offer, and they feel like if he were on the debate stage, he would take all the oxygen out of the room. So this is an opportunity for these candidates to get their message across without Trump sort of looming over them directly on that stage. I think the issues that are going to be tough for them to tackle are how they're going to handle former President Trump. You know, a lot of them have been tiptoeing, not necessarily directing him, attacking him directly, trying not to alienate his voters. Well, that hasn't necessarily been working. So we'll see if people take a different line of attack. The other issue, abortion. This is the one issue where Republicans are pretty far apart. The folks on this stage, they have pretty different positions on this issue. Some have not been super clear. So I imagine that's another issue that moderators might be asking for some clarity on, and folks should be preparing for.
Dasha Burns with what to watch for tonight. Dasha, thank you so much. You can catch our special debate post coverage later tonight on NBC News Now. Now, you remember the U.S. soldier who crossed the border into North Korea back in July? Lots of questions there, right? Lots of mystery. Well, tonight, Travis King is officially in American custody. He is expected to arrive in Texas late Wednesday or early Thursday. Earlier, NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt spoke with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, about his release.
Were there negotiations that you could tell us about that led up to this?
Sure. You know, obviously there's negotiations through various parties. The Department of State is the one who had lead on all of it, and we certainly appreciate the efforts of all those involved, but it's really not my place to go over all the details of how that happened.
NBC's Josh Letterman has more for us.
U.S. Private Travis King is now on his way to Brooke Army Medical Center in the San Antonio area after a flight first from China into South Korea and then from a U.S. airbase in South Korea back to the United States, where he's going to be able to get specialized services and medical care from the U.S. government, specifically for people who are prisoners of war, hostages, or wrongfully detained. This will cap a remarkable return to the United States for Travis King some 6 weeks after he crossed illegally into North Korea on his own will, according to U.S. and North Korean officials. And it's a big mystery right now why exactly North Korea agreed to release him without getting anything in return, according to U.S. officials who say there was no concession granted to North Korea, but that they worked through the Swedish government, which acts on behalf of U.S. interests in North Korea, for more than a month to try to secure his release. In fact, U.S. officials are saying they would love for this to lead to diplomacy with North Korea, to be able to really have conversations about the nuclear program and other concerns, but they are not particularly optimistic or holding their breath right now that this is going to mean anything other than simply the release of this one U.S. citizen. And tonight, we're actually hearing from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un once again with bombastic language about the U.S., saying North Korea needs to increase its supply of nuclear weapons because of threats from the U.S. and its allies, Japan and South Korea. And so no indications that this is going to quickly lead to a fast rapprochement between the U.S. and North Korea. But Biden administration officials saying that the good news is that Travis King is in good health, in good spirits. He is heading home and he is going to be safe. We're hearing from his mother in a statement saying she will be forever grateful to the U.S. government for bringing him home.
NBC's Josh Letterman, thank you. Now, as to the WGA, I mean, you've heard by now the big news out of Hollywood, right? The writers' strike is officially over. Writers Guild leaders unanimously approved the deal last night, and we broke the news during this show. Now, all that's left is for the roughly 11,000 Guild members to ratify the deal. NBC's entertainment correspondent Chloe Melas has more.
This morning, the 148-day writers' strike is officially over. The WGA board and council releasing a statement late Tuesday saying that the new agreement unanimously passed and is now in the hands of Guild members.
Feeling really happy, actually a lot of emotions. The deal is still tentative because we still have to vote on it, but very, very happy that there seems to be an end in sight.
The 94-page agreement includes much of what writers have been waiting for. Increased residuals and transparency for streaming content, pay increases, with most members getting a 5% raise, increased health and pension contributions, and specific guidelines around the use of AI, including that it cannot be considered source material and can't be used to undermine a writer's credit or separated rights. Writers taking to social media to share their relief and gratitude. One posting, "Thanks to every member who negotiated and every member who walked the walk." The provisional 3-year agreement was reached late Sunday between the WGA and AMPTP, which represents streaming and studios, including Comcast, the parent company of NBC Universal. Tuesday's vote to move the deal through and end the strike right away means that late night shows and daytime talk could be back as soon as next week. And fresh episodes of your favorite scripted shows could be back on track by January.
We did everything that we could.
However, it remains to be seen if there will actually be actors available to act.
We can't do anything without actors. We need them desperately.
The SAG-AFTRA union saying Tuesday, "We are reviewing the WGA's tentative agreement and are committed to achieving a fair and just deal for our members. We remain on strike. We will not speculate regarding schedule or next steps."
I'm hoping end of October. I'm done walking this line, even though I love it, but my feet are tired. I'm ready to get back to work.
Today, thousands of writers can do just that. Hollywood now one big step closer to reopening.
NBC News correspondent David Noriega joins us now from Los Angeles. David, great to see you. So let's break down this $233 million deal, right? Two things that were at the top of the writers' demand were better pay and better staffing. What did they win here?
Yeah, Jake, any labor negotiation is going to involve pay. On that front, the writers did pretty well. They got a significant increase. It adds up to about 13% compounded over 3 years. Most other points in this conflict were much more specific to the industry and specifically had to do with kind of bringing it into the present day of streaming. That includes staffing, as you mentioned. So writers' rooms for series these days are much smaller because streaming series are shorter. This agreement guarantees that even the shortest series will have a set number, sort of a floor number of writers in the writers' room, which means that the industry as a whole will have a floor for how many writing jobs it has. That's a significant gain for the union.
And now, David, we've heard a lot about, residual checks. A lot of people have shared their experiences with that. In fact, one writer for the hit show Suits, which has over 3 billion minutes, billion with a B, of watch time on streaming platforms, shared how much he made for the episode he wrote. He got less than $300 in streaming residuals. And that is, of course, right, because once upon a time you calculated residuals off of advertising money that came in back when everything worked the way that NBC and others used to work, right? And now we're in this new world of streaming where you don't get to see how much money the originating company made. I mean, how is that going to work now? How will they bring that into the modern day, as you mentioned?
Right, so that's another good example, right? If you are a writer on, say, Seinfeld, every time an episode aired on network TV, you would make money, and that money would add up. As you pointed out, that's not the case with streaming. This agreement, this is a really big change in the industry. This agreement changes that by creating a system whereby the more popular a streaming show, the more money the writers on that show wind up making on the back end. Again, really significant. Also, as a side note, significant because it means the streamers are going to have to share data with the union, metrics about how popular these shows, in fact, are, how often they get streamed. That is a big deal in and of itself because previously that data was sort of in a black box. The streamers weren't really sharing it with anyone. Jake.
That's right. I mean, David, you are speaking my language, brother, right? As a tech correspondent, when companies share data and don't do a black box anymore, that is a very big deal. And, of course, speaking of this, right, I was really interested to see, how it would play out with AI and the regulations there. What does the deal say about the use of artificial intelligence in the writing space?
Yeah, we've been talking about streaming, which is kind of the technological change that brings us to the present day. AI is the big new one that is going to take us into the future. On this front, the writers got pretty much what they were asking for, which is new sort of guardrails, guidelines around how this technology can and cannot be used. For example, the tech can't be used to generate source material, which a company then hires writers to turn into a script, but still own the original idea. This is a big deal, not just for the industry, but it's a big deal, I think, for the economy and for probably most industries, right? AI is a new frontier in every respect, including how it intersects with labor and labor rights. And I think that probably most industries, and especially most unions, are going to be looking at this agreement as kind of a watershed moment and looking to the specifics of it to see how they can get similar protections of their own.
David Noriega with I mean, I imagine us speaking 3 years from now, right, when this contract expires, and who knows what kind of technological issues we will be talking about at that time. I know you have you've been on the air with us for a few days now, but still I want to welcome you to NBC. David Noriega, everybody. Thank you so much. Still to come tonight, something you don't see every day, a sitting member of Congress arraigned in federal court. We have more on what happened in the case against Senator Bob Menendez, and then dozens of arrests after a string of looting in Philadelphia. And later, a look into what Congress can do to get a grip on artificial intelligence. We are just getting started tonight. Please stay tuned. Welcome back. Here are some of the other headlines we are watching tonight. Thousands of Las Vegas hospitality workers voted yesterday to authorize a strike. The Culinary Workers Union is bargaining for better pay, benefits, and working conditions. And here's the thing, the union has not gone on strike in more than 30 years. This could impact more than 36 casinos and hotels on the Las Vegas Strip. The husband of a Bronx daycare owner where a toddler died after allegedly being exposed to fentanyl was arrested in Mexico. Police say the man was seen on security video at the daycare the same day the one-year-old became sick. His wife and others that worked at that daycare are accused of dealing drugs out of the facility. In Baltimore, a manhunt is underway for a convicted felon accused of killing tech CEO. 26-year-old Pavel Lepere was found dead in an apartment building on Monday. Now, police are warning the people of Baltimore that the suspect on the loose, quote, will do anything he can to cause harm. The Biden administration is allowing Israeli citizens to travel to the U.S. without a visa. Under the waiver program announced today, Israelis will be able to travel here for up to 90 days. Israel joins a group of 40 European and Asian countries able to travel here without visas. And Bruce Springsteen will not be returning to the stage anytime soon. The boss announced today in a statement he is postponing the rest of his tour this year to focus on recovering from peptic ulcer disease. He originally postponed 2 shows last month. The rescheduled dates will be announced next week. Our thoughts are with him. Earlier today, New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez and his wife pled not guilty in federal court. Menendez is accused of accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes in exchange for political favors. Now, more than half of all senators from his own party are calling on him to step down.
Senator Menendez is entitled to a presumption of innocence and a full trial, but I think he should resign.
I do think he should step down in order to mount and focus on his defense.
He's entitled to have his day in court, but he is not entitled to remain in the Senate, and he needs to go.
As the pressure mounts, NBC's Ken Delanian has the latest.
Senator Robert Menendez and his wife and 2 of their co-defendants were arraigned today in federal court in Manhattan, and they all pleaded not guilty and were released on their own recognizance. Menendez bail set at $100,000, his wife at $250,000. Among the conditions of release were that Senator Menendez can't travel abroad except for official business, and even then with permission of the trial judge. Just a reminder that criminal defendants have fewer rights than the rest of us, even if they remain U.S. senators. It was an uneventful court hearing. The senator didn't address reporters inside the courthouse or outside afterwards. And it really just capped an extraordinary week for the senator, facing this 39-page shocking indictment accusing him of a massive corruption scheme, a conspiracy to commit bribery, extortion, and fraud, saying essentially that he sold his office in exchange for bribes. He, of course, professing his innocence, assuring his constituents that he will be exonerated. Also today, NBC News reporting that back in 2020, Senator Menendez single-handedly blocked legislation that would have strengthened and reformed the law that regulates foreign lobbying and foreign influence in the United States. He did that when a group of senators were trying to get the bill on the floor and they needed unanimous consent. And this was a bill that had Republican and Democratic support. And Senator Menendez stood up and blocked it. And he said he was blocking it because it needed further study, but that he was in favor of strengthening the Foreign Agents Registration Act, but just not at that time. And so it wasn't controversial at the time. But in light of the current indictment, it looks very suspicious because the bill that he was blocking would have regulated some of the very conduct he's accused of, including his relationship with an Egyptian-American businessman who was brokering meetings with Menendez and Egyptian government officials. And at one point, that businessman texted with an Egyptian general and called Senator Menendez our man in Washington. So, and on that score, the FBI, we're reporting, NBC News is reporting, the FBI is conducting a parallel counterintelligence investigation to try to determine to what extent, if at all, Egyptian intelligence was involved in this bribery scheme, particularly whether they co-opted the senator's wife. So amid all of this, the senator, again, professing his innocence and resisting mounting calls from within the Senate and elsewhere, including from Democrats, that he should resign and step away from the Senate and allow someone else to take his seat. He's not prepared to do that. He says he's going to remain the senior senator from New Jersey as he fights these charges in what will be a year-long criminal odyssey for Senator Robert Menendez.
A year-long criminal odyssey. NBC's Ken Delanian, thank you so much. Tensions are running high over on Capitol Hill, where the deadline for a government shutdown is fast approaching. Things are so pessimistic over there that some staffers were heard betting on not whether a shutdown will happen, but how long it will last. The federal government will run out of funding at 12:01 a.m. Eastern this Sunday, and if lawmakers don't find common ground before then, well, millions of federal workers will lose pay, and that includes military personnel and border agents. Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and his caucus are bickering over spending bills. They are demanding deep cuts that Democrats simply will not agree to. Meanwhile, the Senate did introduce a short-term bill to fund the government through November 17th, but it looks like even that is something Republicans there cannot bring themselves to endorse, which makes it a non-starter in the House. NBC's Sahil Kapoor joins me now to help break this down. Sahil, great to see you. The Senate is trying here, but it seems like the House is not having it. Did they make any progress over on Capitol Hill today at all?
No meaningful progress to resolving this mess, Jake. The two chambers are operating on very different tracks. The Senate is trying to vote as quickly as possible on that bipartisan short-term funding bill to keep the government open through November 17th. It's got some other provisions in there, some money for Ukraine, about $6 billion, some money for FEMA for emergency disaster aid. It has broad support among Democrats and Republicans, including the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who wants to pass it quickly. They're trying to get that vote done between now and that Saturday deadline. There are some negotiations happening about amendments to do it quickly. But on the House side, which is controlled by Republicans, there is no progress toward a solution on a short-term government funding bill. Right now, Speaker McCarthy is trying to get full-year appropriations bills that reflect Republican priorities, that have conservative spending cuts and separate riders on them. Even if he does pass them in the next few days, that's not going to prevent a government shutdown because those bills are going nowhere in the Democratic-controlled Senate. They're not going to be signed into law by President Biden. And McCarthy did not comment on whether he would, by any chance, bring up that Senate CR if it were to pass and arrive, in his chamber. Let's have a listen to what the Majority Leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and McCarthy had to say.
The only way out of a shutdown is bipartisanship. And by constantly adhering to what the hard right wants, you're aiming for a shutdown.
Is the Senate's plan a non-starter in the House?
I don't see the support in the House. Why am I asked the president to sit down? Because the Senate has not done their job. The Senate has not taken up the House work. So no, the president should step in and do something about it.
So there you see McCarthy opposing that Senate continuing resolution. He has not released one of his own. McCarthy said he is hoping to vote as early as Friday on a short-term bill of the Republicans' own in the House that would include conservative border and immigration provisions, which would make it a non-starter in the Senate. So right now, the chamber's operating in very, very different tracks.
And Sahil, stepping back from what we're looking at here, today is Wednesday, right? Should we be giving up hope? Is there any chance, do you think, that we could see something change before 12:01 a.m. on Sunday? Or, in your opinion, is it more or less guaranteed now?
It would require something of a miracle to get a law passed that averts a shutdown by that Saturday midnight deadline. Right now, it's a situation of, it's kind of 3-on-1 with House Democrats as well as Senate Democrats and Republicans all agreeing that there should be a short-term funding bill, basically continuing the status quo until they figure out a longer-term deal. But and the House Republican majority, it's very likely that McCarthy's hardliners are going to have to touch this stove and see how painful it is politically before they are to back down. That's the way things are going. There's a lot of tension that's been building up all year. It's been leading to this moment. It's very difficult to see how McCarthy gets out of this. And if he tries to cut a deal between now and this weekend with Democrats, it's very likely that some of his hardliners will try to overthrow him.
Touching the stove, a great turn of phrase for this situation we're all in here. Senior national political correspondent Sahil Kapoor. Sahil, thank you so much. Turning now to Philadelphia, where police arrested dozens of people last night after a violent looting spree there, a growing problem around the country that seems to be forcing retailers to take drastic measures. NBC's Tom Yamas has that story.
Tonight, more than 50 people are under arrest in connection with this overnight crime wave that hit Philadelphia. Officers tackling suspects ransacking businesses. Crowds of suspected thieves seen running from stores like Apple, Lululemon, and Foot Locker.
This is not shoplifting. This is looting. This is riot.
It's called organized retail theft. It's happening all over America, killing business and making shopping even more expensive. Target says crooks are forcing them to close 9 stores by October, saying theft is, quote, threatening the safety of our team and guests.
This Target in Oakland is one of the ones shutting down, and you can see what the shopping experience is like. You got deodorant, you have shaving cream all locked up, even toothpaste. You have to call someone to help you buy one because of thieves.
But it's the crime outside of stores in Oakland that is terrifying residents. 10,000 cars stolen just this year. Burglaries and robberies also up. Last week, cameras captured this woman screaming in agony as thieves dragged her across the street trying to steal her purse. It mirrors another incident earlier this month.
When you see crime like that during the day, what does that tell you?
It tells me that there's a sense of lawlessness, that there are people in our community that don't fear being arrested.
LaRon Armstrong was the latest Oakland police chief to be fired.
Is it a free-for-all when it comes to crime in Oakland?
I think it's a combination of lack of enforcement, not enough resources, and then not strong enough prosecution.
And now residents of Oakland say they've had enough, closing their own businesses in protest of a city they say can't keep them safe.
Letting violent crime criminals out as soon as they're apprehended and booked does not lead to public safety.
I've never seen Oakland this way before.
Residents now calling for new leadership, tougher laws, and a turnaround before crime cripples their city. Tom Yamas, NBC News, Oakland.
Coming up, advanced DNA testing has exonerated a man in a California prison after nearly 3 decades behind bars. But first, have a look at this. A bear crashed a birthday picnic in Mexico. You see that mom right there? She had a plan just in case something wild showed up. See, her son has Down syndrome, and he's afraid of animals, so she planned out a game. This is amazing. She covered her son's face and acted like a statue. She told him to play along. Moms are amazing, everybody. You can see she kept her eyes down and stayed totally still so the bear wouldn't react. Her son didn't either, and luckily that worked for several agonizing minutes, and all they lost were enchiladas and tacos. Hey, welcome back. Here are some of the stories happening here out west. A man who was wrongfully imprisoned for nearly 30 years is finally free thanks to DNA testing that cleared his name. He was convicted in a 1995 attack on a couple sitting in a parked car in L.A. County, and at the time, he falsely confessed to the attack. Here in San Francisco, Mayor London Breed has proposed a controversial drug treatment program to get cash assistance. Basically, people who currently apply for assistance programs here in San Francisco would be tested for certain substances, and if positive, they would need to participate in a treatment program in order to get their money. If enacted, this would affect a lot of people who depend on assistance in one of the most progressive cities in the country. And police say someone spotted a cat while driving over the Coronado Bridge, but when they stopped to save it, someone hit their car, and it caused a terrible chain reaction. When it was over, 3 cars were hit and damaged, but luckily no one was hurt. The orange tabby, meanwhile, was taken to an animal shelter. We're not sure if the little guy has been adopted yet. Fingers crossed. In Delaware, a state trooper is facing felony charges after he allegedly assaulted a 15-year-old last month. It all escalated from a prank when a group of teenagers ran up to the trooper's house with one of them covering their face and kicking the door. The trooper, whose name is Dempsey Walters, was on duty at the time. He wasn't home. His girlfriend called him with a description of the teens, and Walters reached out to fellow officers for help in tracking them down. Eventually, Walters was alerted that the teens had been detained. Now, what we're about to show is officer video of the moment when Walters arrived on the scene. The video was released by Delaware's Department of Justice with images of those teens blurred out. So, hey, people, we want to warn you. Some of what you're about to see is disturbing.
I don't have anything. I don't have... Mommy! Mommy!
Now, Walters confronted the teens after they were detained, which is when investigators say he turned off his body cam before punching that 15-year-old in the face, fracturing his eye socket. He now faces several charges after an indictment was filed on Monday, which includes the first use of a new felony law passed in Delaware just last year. NBC's Kristen Dahlgren joins me now. Kristen, thanks for being here. How have Walters and the Delaware State Police responded to this indictment?
Right. So Dempsey Walters has been suspended without pay. He was indicted on the charges. He pled not guilty. We did reach out to him, but haven't heard back. As far as the Delaware State Police, in an earlier press conference, they did apologize to the victims. And then we did get a statement from the Delaware Police Association that I want to show you. It reads in part that they have stood firm in defense of the justice system and the guarantee of due process. So not really standing by their officer at this point, Jake.
And Kristen, you know, the circumstances here and the injury sound terrible. I mean, how is the teen doing after that broken eye socket?
Right. So I talked to the lawyer today. There were actually two teens who were injured. One had an ankle injury, and then the greater injury was that broken eye socket. So the lawyer representing said, you know, both teens are really having trouble at this point. The one with the broken eye socket, he had to have an extensive surgery. Two surgeons took 8 hours. They had to put plates and screws and mesh into his face to try to fix it. And he said they also were both suffering from a lot of mental strain at this point over what happened. So they do plan to sue. In addition to the criminal charges against the state trooper, they also are planning a civil lawsuit at some point in the future.
Terrible injuries, criminal charges, a suit, all from a prank. Kristen Dahlgren, thank you so much for being here. Still to come tonight, an absolute nightmare fire at a wedding in Iraq. What we know about how it started and the survivors. And then widespread flash flooding in Vietnam after tons of rain. We will take you around the world. That's next. Welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world in 80 seconds. The Canadian House Speaker resigned yesterday after a very poorly vetted invitation. The Speaker invited a 98-year-old World War II veteran who, it was learned later, had fought for the Nazis to a speech given by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. President Zelensky is Jewish, by the way. Lawmakers even gave the elderly guest a standing ovation because the House Speaker introduced the man as a war hero. The Speaker says he did not know any of this until Jewish groups expressed anger about the invite days later. Today, a massive fire killed at least 100 people at a wedding hall in Iraq. We're starting to get new footage of this terrible disaster now. Officials say it was caused by fireworks meant to celebrate the newlyweds. Some of the people there say the fireworks hit the ceiling and set it ablaze within seconds. In Brazil, a pretty severe drought is hitting the Amazon rainforest, and officials are saying it could impact 500,000 people by the end of the year. They are concerned the drought will significantly affect fishing, transportation, and access to other supplies. And heavy rains over the past few days in central Vietnam have caused intense flash flooding there. Power lines are down, and local reports say thousands of people are displaced without drinkable food or water. Before we go, it's time for the future of everything. We're going to start here with something that kicked off 25 years ago that revolutionized our world. You want to guess what it was? Just Google it. And how far is Congress willing or able to go in reining in artificial intelligence? Stay tuned. It's time now for the future of everything. Tonight, we are talking about the role that AI could play in the upcoming 2024 election. But first, We have a birthday to celebrate. Google turns 25 today. For a generation now, the tech giant has shaped the way we communicate and find information, even speak, because, Google's a verb, right? NBC's Harry Smith shows us how Google not only defined our past, but is now pushing us to the future.
The Googleplex has a kind of college-y vibe. But here, pursuit of the near impossible supersedes beer pong. Google, initially called Backrub, was conceived in a nearby Stanford dorm room, and true to Silicon Valley startup legend, moved to a garage 25 years ago.
My parents had never heard of Google at the time. Most people hadn't.
Engineer Jen Fitzpatrick joined the company a year later.
And I think my dad thought I was a little bit nuts going to this tiny little company that no one had ever heard of, and as far as he was concerned, was probably going to be out of business before long.
Jen's desk, a wooden door propped up by sawhorses. Back then, when she showed Google to people in coffee shops, they were mystified.
It's like people were sometimes intimidated by the big white blank page with a box in the middle of it. They didn't know what to type.
That blank space has propagated a slew of offspring, from Gmail in 2001 to Maps in 2005. They bought YouTube in 2006 and launched Chrome and Android in 2008. Now Google's top products serve some 2 billion people each, and Alphabet, Google's holding company, is worth more than $1 trillion. For Gen Zers and new employees, Lucas Gonzalez and Anousheh Sheikh, the world was always at their fingertips, online.
We don't remember a time before Google, so I think we're best equipped to understand the changes that are happening.
The technology they work on was for decades out of reach.
I work on responsible AI, artificial intelligence at Google.
I work at Google DeepMind on our large model efforts.
Both whip-smart and irrepressibly optimistic about AI's possibilities. Google's big bet for the next 25 years. And for the AI wary, this thought.
Think about maybe how you felt when you first traveled on a plane, or when you first used a PC or logged onto the internet. I think for new things, there's still this discovery phase where you have to try something out and see what it's like.
Google's conversational chatbot AI is called Bard, a late competitor to OpenAI's ChatGPT. Shakespeare, it's not. Yet.
Where is AI right now?
I think the latest generation of generative AI is an infant. It is very early.
Sissy Shao is a vice president and general manager at Google, overseeing Bard, which now can plug into Gmail.
What did you ask Bard?
I said, summarize all the emails from my kids' school. As a busy parent, you understand the start of school year is very stressful. Inundation of emails, buy this, prepare that, and Bard was able to summarize all that, saved me hours of time, did it in minutes.
From the earliest days, Don't Be Evil has been embedded in Google's ethos. So we asked,
will Bard be fair and unbiased?
Our design with Bard is to be neutral and unbiased. We do feel like the right thing to do is to show people like a diversity of opinions on any particular topic.
But AI still concerns a lot of people. Numerous tech industry leaders have called for a moratorium on AI development, but not Shao, not Google.
I think that with any technology, good actors and bad actors will have access to it. And I think it's really about having industry and governments really work together to make sure that protections are put in place so that these technologies are applied for the immense good that they can capture and also protect against the downsides.
Downsides? How about job security for old news guys?
So in this exercise of doing our deep dive here, we actually asked Bard to come up with some questions to ask you. Can you guess which one it was?
No, I can't guess, but Bard's pretty good at coming up with questions.
It was the one about, will Bard be fair and unbiased?
Ah, good job, Bard. It's a good question.
Harry Smith, NBC News.
Now, when it comes to AI, the future of political campaigns, well, it's already here. Here is part of some recent reporting from my colleague Hallie Jackson about where it is already showing up.
From fake pictures of Donald Trump getting arrested to a fake video of President Biden instituting a military draft.
The recommended way forward will be to invoke the Selective Service Act.
Artificial intelligence, with its easily accessed voice cloning and face swapping tools, adding a new dimension to the political universe. Take this computer-generated Elizabeth Warren, suggesting Republicans shouldn't be allowed to cast ballots.
It is necessary to restrict Republican voting in the 2024 election.
The senator never said that, but AI can make it easier for anyone, not just experts, to create fake content.
Now, it's that fake content that politicians and tech giants are trying to get ahead of. In fact, starting next month, election ads on YouTube and other Google platforms that use AI to change people or events, well, they're going to have a warning label on them. And in Washington, there's been some talk of addressing the problem through legislation, but so far, no meaningful bills have advanced, despite plenty of hearings like the one in the Senate today.
I believe strongly in the power of elections. I also believe in innovation, and we have got to be able to draw that line.
We shouldn't immediately indulge the impulse for government to just do something, as they say, before we fully understand the impacts of the emerging technology.
We can take action both in regulating artificial intelligence and ensuring the public knows what is artificially produced, and also ensuring that we have oversight of what social media companies are doing.
Now, with me is Deborah Raji. She's a Mozilla Fellow at the University of California, Berkeley, and she was also the only current academic invited to a closed-door Senate AI hearing earlier this month, alongside the CEOs of Meta, Microsoft, Google, and other big companies. Dr. Maya Wiley, who you saw there, was also there. But again, you were in speaking for all academics everywhere, Ms. Raji. And so, I want to talk to you first a little bit about what it's like to be in a closed-door setting alongside some of the biggest tech CEOs in the world, talking about this stuff with lawmakers. What did you hear from those tech CEOs? What were their talking points, and how did you try and push back on them?
Yeah, I think as the researcher in the room, I felt a lot of responsibility to sort of bring a lot of the claims coming from the companies and the corporate representatives down to earth. The companies have had a lot of opportunity to interact with lawmakers, to advertise their technology in various ways and demonstrate that there are certain things that these technologies can do, but they're not very incentivized to discuss the limitations of that technology or other externalities, sort of side effects of the use and development of this technology that can cause serious harm to those that are impacted. And on the research side, we've spent years, decades, almost a decade at this point, thinking very critically about how to measure and collect evidence for some of that harm. And so I think a lot of the role that I played in that room, it was definitely a certain amount of pressure as the only one there. Would have been have a lot more of my colleagues around. But I definitely try to spend as much time as possible being able to push back on these claims, to clarify the details of, when someone would say that something was, operating too great or working very perfectly, that AI would cure cancer or poverty, adding complexity by saying, well, there are jobs being created, but, some of these data labeling jobs are not the best and definitely not regulated. ChatGPT is really great, but it still struggles for basic, applications and translation. And a lot of the watermarking technology that I think lawmakers have been enthusiastic about hasn't actually yielded the sort of results that we would need in order to trust its use in high-stakes scenarios. So, that's the thing I want to ask you about here, Deb. Is this idea that we don't currently have a technological solution to telling the difference between something that's AI generated and something that's not, even though these companies have put this out there. So, for you, on the eve of 2024, and with all the work that you have done, looking at the way that marginalized communities are affected, and just really short-term, near-term threats. I mean, where for you does this, deep fake and content farm kind of possibility of something like ChatGPT creating incredible propaganda, maybe moving the electorate around a little bit? Where does that rank on your list of things to be worried about? Yeah, so I think it's definitely a genuine risk, but we've had this risk for a while. There's been, those that are motivated to push forward these campaigns have had the technology available to them to be able to push forward on that for a while. There has been also, and in the hearing, with Klobuchar, it was mentioned that there's concern around the apparatus required in order to monitor and track individual posts, to track for, deep fake generated content. And I think my main concern is the idea of using technology to solve a problem that was created by technology. So I was a little concerned to hear about, depending on watermarking technology. The Markup, which is an investigative journalism group that focuses on tech topics, released a report recently about how a lot of the watermarking technology for ChatGPT generated text, disproportionately flags the content of non-native English speakers as generated text, putting a lot of students at risk of discrimination in their educational context at at various high-level institutions. And so my concern is just rushing towards solutions that are superficial or inadequate to address the underlying real-world harms, which in this case is, what does it mean for these platforms to be held responsible for the content that's distributed on there? And also, what does it mean for these companies to control and to have very, very serious restrictions around political advertising in particular? So I feel like these more institutional level questions have been around for a long time and might be the more legitimate source of concern rather than specifically the way that AI is interacting with this issue.
Yeah. Deborah Raji, the Mozilla fellow at UC Berkeley, thank you so much for being with us. And that does it for us tonight. I am Jake Ward. It's been a great pleasure to be here. We'll see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.